My name is Adrian Carter, and my life fell apart in a single night. 15 years of marriage, gone. My wife, Marissa, wasn't just cheating on me. She stole from our 13-year-old daughter's trust fund and ran off with another man. Our daughter's future, her college, her dreams, wiped out. I found out the truth in the worst way possible, through screenshots, bank transactions, and a betrayal so deep I could barely breathe. And the worst part? She didn't even try to hide it. She thought she could get away with it, but she underestimated two things: my love for my daughter and my ability to fight back. That night, I made a promise. She took from my daughter. Now, I'll take everything from her. But that was just the beginning, because when you expose one lie, you uncover 1,000 more. So, tell me, what would you do if the person you trusted most destroyed your family? Would you walk away? Or would you fight to take back everything they stole? Adrian Carter sat in his home office, savoring the quiet hum of a peaceful evening. The warm glow from the desk lamp illuminated the blueprints in front of him, his latest architectural project, a museum that would blend history with modern elegance. His fingers traced the lines absent-mindedly, his mind momentarily drifting to the long hours he had poured into this design. A notification chimed on his laptop. He glanced at the screen, expecting a routine email or a reminder from his assistant. Instead, it was a message from his daughter, Celeste. "Dad, check your laptop." A slight frown formed on his face. Celeste never messaged him this late. He hesitated, then clicked on the folder labeled Important. Inside, a series of screenshots filled the screen. Text messages, bank transfers, transaction receipts. At first, the words blurred together in his exhaustion. But as his eyes adjusted, the reality slammed into him like a freight train. Marissa Carter, his wife of 15 years, the mother of his daughter, betraying him in the most unforgivable way. The messages were clear, undeniable. Whispered affections between Marissa and Dominic Graves, a real estate developer who had once been a guest at their dinner table. Lies exchanged in the form of stolen glances and secret meetings. "I love you, Dominic. He doesn't understand me like you do." Adrian's breath hitched as he scrolled further. Transactions, thousands of dollars withdrawn, funneled into private accounts, splurged on luxury hotels, designer clothes, and extravagant weekends. Not just from their shared funds, from Celeste's trust fund. His fingers curled into fists, his knuckles turning white against the desk. He could handle being betrayed. He could handle the infidelity, the deception. But stealing from their daughter? Robbing Celeste's future to fund an affair? Adrian inhaled sharply, willing the rage to stay contained, for now. The soft creak of the office door barely registered before he felt Celeste's presence beside him. His 13-year-old daughter, perceptive beyond her years, stood quietly, watching him with those same steel-gray eyes he saw in the mirror every morning. "You weren't supposed to find out like this," she said softly. He turned, searching her face, struggling to find words. "How long have you known?" "Months," she admitted. "I saw how she acted around her phone, hiding her screen. I installed monitoring software." A sharp pang of sorrow sliced through him. No child should have to spy on their own mother. No child should have to protect their father from betrayal. "She's been stealing from me, hasn't she?" Celeste asked. Her voice didn't waver. It wasn't the voice of a child. It was the voice of someone who had already accepted the truth. Adrian nodded slowly. "She has." Celeste exhaled, nodding to herself as if confirming what she already knew. "Then, what are we going to do?" He looked at her. This brilliant, resilient child who had been forced to carry burdens far too heavy for her young shoulders. "Your mother thinks she's clever," Adrian murmured, his voice ice cold. "Let's see how clever she really is." That night, Adrian went through the motions. He prepared dinner as usual, setting 3 places at the dining table. The smell of roasted chicken filled the air, but he barely tasted it. He was too busy studying his wife. Marissa waltzed in at 7, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her lips painted in a soft shade of red. In her hands, a set of designer shopping bags dangled from her arms like trophies. "Sorry I'm late," she said breezily, pressing a quick kiss to his cheek. The consultation for the Graves project ran long. Adrian let his eyes linger on her a moment longer than necessary. testing her, watching for any flicker of guilt. He saw none, only arrogance. "How's Dominic?" he asked casually as he cut into his meal. Marissa froze for just a fraction of a second before recovering. "He's fine. Why?" He chewed slowly, letting the silence stretch, enjoying the way it made her shift uncomfortably in her seat. "No reason," he said smoothly. "Just curious." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Adrian smiled back. Hours later, when the house was silent, he lay awake beside her, staring at the ceiling. His mind raced, replaying every memory, every moment that had led them here. He thought of their wedding day, the way she had smiled at him, promised forever. Lies. He thought of the nights she had told him she was working late, the way she had turned away when he reached for her. Lies. Had she ever loved him? Or had it always been about the life he could provide? The money, the house, the status. She took from him. She took from their daughter. Adrian inhaled slowly, steadying himself. He wasn't going to confront her tonight. Number. That would be too easy. He needed to be patient. She thought she had won. She had no idea what was coming. By morning, Adrian had made his decision. Marissa was in their bedroom, carefully folding expensive clothes into a suitcase he hadn't seen before. The scent of her expensive perfume lingered in the air. "I want a divorce," she said, not bothering to look up. Adrian leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. His expression was unreadable. "Of course you do," he said calmly. "Planning to run off with Dominic?" Her head snapped up, her blue eyes narrowing. "That's none of your business." His lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Did you think I wouldn't find out about the trust fund?" Marissa's face drained of color. She opened her mouth, denial already forming, but Adrian stepped forward, tossing the stack of printed evidence onto the bed. The messages, the transactions, the stolen money. She started. "Don't," he interrupted, his voice low and lethal. "Don't insult me with a lie." Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the edge of the bed. But then she straightened, forcing composure. "You can't prove anything." Adrian exhaled a slow, measured breath. She still didn't get it. "You don't understand," he murmured, shaking his head. "I don't need to prove it." He turned, walking toward the door, pausing only once. "Remember this moment, Marissa," he said quietly. "You thought you won." And then he left. Behind him, the silence was deafening. She had no idea what was coming next. 2 days had passed since I walked out of that bedroom, leaving Marissa speechless, clutching the evidence of her own betrayal. 2 days since she thought she could steal from our daughter and walk away unscathed. This morning, the storm I had set in motion was about to reach its peak. Marissa's screams echoed through the house, loud enough that if the walls had ears, even they would flinch. I knew what she had just discovered. Her phone must have been buzzing uncontrollably for the past hour, notifications from texts, emails, and social media. She stormed into the hallway, clutching her phone like a lifeline, her perfectly manicured nails trembling. "Adrian, what the hell did you do?" I leaned against the kitchen counter, sipping my coffee, calm as ever. "Good morning to you too." Her eyes were wild, darting across the room like a trapped animal. "My accounts are frozen. I can't access anything. And my social media. Someone hacked everything." I raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. "That's unfortunate." She let out a bitter laugh, pacing back and forth. "Don't play dumb with me. This has your name written all over it." She wasn't entirely wrong, but I wasn't about to give her the satisfaction of confirmation. Instead, I took another slow sip of coffee. "I warned you, Marissa. Actions have consequences." Her breathing was shallow, her face pale. She pulled up a news article on her phone and shoved it in front of me. Marissa Carter, wife of acclaimed architect, exposed for infidelity and fraud. Right beneath the headline was a gallery of screenshots, the stolen trust fund transactions, the intimate texts with Dominic Graves, the receipts for extravagant vacations, all funded by money meant for our daughter's future. "Everything is out there," she whispered, more to herself than to me. I met her gaze, unblinking. "And it's only the beginning." She let out a strangled sound, something between a sob and a gasp, before grabbing her purse and bolting out the door. I didn't stop her. She was about to learn what it felt like to lose everything. I expected her next stop. Marissa burst through the doors of the bank, her heels clicking against the polished floors. Her signature confidence wavered as she approached the teller, still clinging to the illusion that she could fix this. "I need to make a withdrawal," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. The banker, a middle-aged woman with a tight smile, typed a few things into her computer before looking back at Marissa with polite sympathy. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Carter, but your accounts have been frozen due to a legal investigation." Marissa blinked, her expression slipping into one of pure panic. "What? That's impossible. This is my money." The woman nodded. "I understand, ma'am, but the bank received legal directives this morning. Your assets are under review." Marissa's hands curled into fists. "This is a mistake. There has to be someone I can talk to." "I'm afraid there's nothing more I can do," the banker replied smoothly. Marissa's breathing turned ragged. Her gaze darted to the security guard by the entrance, now watching her closely. She knew that if she made a scene, she'd be escorted out. She spun on her heel and stormed out, her hands already dialing a number. Dominic. She needed him to fix this. But the call rang, and then went to voicemail. Half an hour later, she was pounding on Dominic's penthouse door. When it finally opened, he stood there, shirt unbuttoned, holding a glass of whiskey like he had all the time in the world. "Marissa," he greeted coolly. She pushed past him, her breath heavy. "You knew this would happen, didn't you?" Dominic sighed, setting his glass down. "What did you expect?" She stared at him, her panic shifting into something colder. "You told me we had a plan." He leaned against the counter, smirking. "The plan was to enjoy ourselves. You were useful for a while, but now you're a liability." Her stomach dropped. "You bastard! Now. He chuckled, walking past her. "You knew what this was." She was speechless, rage and humiliation clawing at her insides. She took a step back, her hands shaking. "I gave up everything for you." Dominic shrugged. "Your mistake, not mine." Her throat tightened. As she turned to leave, Dominic called out one last thing. "Oh, and Marissa." She froze. "If you were planning on staying here, don't. You're on your own now." By late afternoon, she was desperate. She tried calling friends. No one answered. She went to her favorite restaurant, hoping to at least sit in the comfort of familiarity. But when she approached the hostess stand, the woman gave her an apologetic smile. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Carter, but we have no tables available for you." Marissa's eyes widened. "What? That's ridiculous. I've been coming here for years." "I understand, ma'am, but we're fully booked." She clenched her jaw, looking around. People were whispering. Some had their phones out, snapping pictures of her. She felt it now, the isolation, the humiliation, the fall from grace. She turned and walked out, feeling truly alone for the first time in years. Back in my office, I leaned back in my chair, watching the news coverage unfold. Celeste had been tracking it all, sending me updates throughout the day. "She's losing everything, Dad." I stared at the message for a moment before typing back. "Good." Graham, my lawyer, stepped into the room, arms crossed. "Do you feel bad for her?" I let out a breath, shaking my head. She made her choices. Now she faces the consequences. My phone buzzed again. Celeste. "Can we go out for ice cream?" I feel like celebrating. For the first time in weeks, I smiled. "Graham, cancel my meetings," I said, grabbing my jacket. "I've got more important things to do." The streets felt colder than usual, or maybe it was just Marissa. She wrapped her coat tighter around herself as she stood near a payphone on a quiet street corner, the weight of everything pressing down on her like a crushing force. The glitz, the luxury, the power, gone. All she had left was the ringing in her ears from the whispers and laughter of people she once considered friends. With trembling fingers, she picked up the receiver and dialed the one number she swore she'd never have to call for help. It rang once, twice, then his voice, cold, unforgiving. "Adrian!" Marissa's breath hitched. She swallowed down the shame, forcing her voice to be soft, vulnerable. "Adrian, please! I need your help!" A beat of silence, then a quiet chuckle, not of amusement. "Help? After everything you did?" Marissa's grip on the receiver tightened. "Dominic used me. I was manipulated. I didn't mean to hurt you or Celeste." Another pause. Then Adrian spoke, his voice calm, yet razor sharp. You didn't mean to steal from our daughter's future? Or you didn't mean to get caught? Tears burned behind her eyes. I made a mistake. A sigh, slow, controlled. No, Marissa, you made a choice. Click. The dial tone rang in her ear, each beep hammering in the finality of what just happened. Adrian was done with her, and now she had nowhere left to turn. Marissa pressed the heels of her palms against her eyes, willing the tears away. She still had one option left. It was dangerous, but desperation had a way of making even the most unthinkable choices seem reasonable. She hailed a cab, giving the driver an address she never thought she'd use. The ride was silent, except for the occasional sniffle she couldn't suppress. When they pulled up to the towering skyscraper, she hesitated. Once she stepped inside, there would be no turning back. But she had no choice. She paid the driver and walked through the glass doors, past the receptionist, straight to the private elevator. She pressed the button for the top floor, her pulse hammering in her throat. The doors slid open to a luxurious office. A wall of glass overlooked the city skyline. Expensive leather furniture sat untouched, the air thick with power. And at the desk, a man barely looked up from his paperwork, Lawrence Caldwell. If there was a man who could make or break someone's life with a single phone call, it was him. She cleared her throat. I need your help. He didn't even glance at her. I don't help failures. Marissa's nails dug into her palms. You don't understand. I know things. I can still be useful. Now he looked up. He studied her, his sharp eyes scanning every inch of her. Her disheveled hair, smudged mascara, the desperation in her posture. Then a slow smirk. And what exactly do you have to offer, Marissa? She licked her lips. Adrian Carter's empire. Across town, Adrian sat at his desk, scrolling through financial reports. Something felt off. Graham burst into his office, his expression tight with urgency. We have a problem. Adrian looked up. Graham threw a folder onto his desk. Caldwell's involved. Adrian stiffened. What did she do? With a heavy breath, Graham flipped the folder open. She sold you out. Adrian's eyes scanned the pages, suspicious activities tied to his assets, quiet inquiries being made about his investments, accounts being subtly probed. Marissa had just handed his entire empire over to a man who thrived on destruction. His jaw clenched. She had no idea what she had just started. Marissa had walked out of Caldwell's office with her chin lifted, forcing confidence she barely felt. He had agreed. She was back in the game. All she had to do was make sure Adrian stayed down. But as she stepped onto the sidewalk, a nagging voice whispered in the back of her mind. Caldwell wasn't known for loyalty. He was known for power, and power didn't protect those who had nothing left to offer. She had made a deal with the devil. She just hoped she could survive it. Back at home, Adrian stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. Celeste sat on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She looked up. Something's wrong, isn't it? Adrian didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked over and gently brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. No one will ever take away what's ours again, he murmured, because Marissa thought she had found salvation. But Adrian Carter wasn't about to let the devil win. The morning air was crisp as I stood by my office window, watching the city wake up. A slow, satisfied breath filled my lungs as I glanced down at my phone. The notifications were already rolling in. Caldwell's empire was taking its first major hit. The moment Marissa sold me out, I knew exactly what my next move would be. Caldwell thought he was untouchable, that his connections could shield him from consequences. But he had underestimated the wrong man. And now, it was time for him to feel the weight of that mistake. Lawrence Caldwell woke up to chaos. The first sign that something was wrong came when his personal banker called him, at 6 a.m. Sir, the voice on the other end said cautiously, we have a situation. Caldwell's brow furrowed as he sat up, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. What kind of situation? There was a brief hesitation before the banker continued. One of your offshore accounts has been frozen by federal regulators, and there are multiple government agencies requesting immediate audits on your businesses. Caldwell swung his legs over the side of the bed, fully awake now. Who the hell authorized that? Another pause. Then the banker's voice dropped, laced with unease. Adrian Carter. Caldwell exhaled sharply, his grip tightening around the phone. That son of a bitch moved faster than he expected. At my office, Graham and I sat across from a group of financial analysts and investigators, each of them bringing new updates. Caldwell is already scrambling, one of them reported. He's calling in favors, trying to stop the investigations, but they're too far along. We've made sure the right people are watching. Good. I leaned back, steepling my fingers. What about the investors? They're spooked, Graham said with a smirk. We've reached out to key stakeholders, warned them that staying with Caldwell means sinking with him. A few are still hesitant, but most are already pulling out. I nodded. Then let's speed up the process. Graham arched an eyebrow. You want me to push harder? I gave him a sharp look. He played dirty first. Now he'll see what it's like to lose everything. Marissa had been riding high on her so-called victory. For the first time in days, she thought she had secured her future. Caldwell was powerful. He had promised to protect her. But when she turned on the news that morning, her stomach dropped. The headlines were brutal. Lawrence Caldwell under federal investigation. Financial freeze. Its major business mogul. Caldwell's investors pulling out amid legal scrutiny. Her hands trembled as she scrolled through article after article. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. Caldwell was supposed to be untouchable. So, why did it look like Adrian was winning? Panic clawed at her chest. Had she just tied herself to a sinking ship? Caldwell's office was eerily quiet when Marissa arrived. Too quiet. The moment she stepped inside, the air felt heavy, charged with something dangerous. He was sitting at his desk, fingers drumming against the polished wood, his expression unreadable. A thick folder lay in front of him. Sit, he ordered. Marissa hesitated, then slowly lowered herself into the chair. Without breaking eye contact, Caldwell picked up the folder and slammed it onto the desk between them. Do you know what happens when my name gets dragged through the mud, Marissa? Her throat went dry. I didn't... He leaned forward, his voice dangerously calm. I don't tolerate failure. Her pulse pounded. You better hope I don't find out you're the reason this is happening, he murmured. Marissa swallowed hard. I can fix this. Caldwell didn't move, didn't blink. She had seen him angry before, but this was something else, something worse. She had backed herself into a corner, and she wasn't sure if she'd make it out. I sat at my desk, scrolling through my phone when I saw her name pop up. Marissa. I smirked. I didn't even need to open the message to know what it was. Desperation, apologies, maybe even begging. Instead of replying, I sent her my own message. You sold me out. Now, you'll watch your new savior fall with you. I knew Caldwell would turn on her. It was only a matter of time before she had nowhere left to run. For the first time, Marissa was truly afraid. And I was just getting started. Caldwell wasn't the type to lose quietly. I knew that. I had expected retaliation, but I didn't expect it to come this fast. The first sign of his counterattack came the very next morning, when Graham stormed into my office, his face dark with tension. We have a problem, he said, slamming a folder onto my desk. I opened it, scanning the contents. Legal documents. Caldwell was suing me. Defamation, business interference, Graham listed off. He's coming after you with everything he's got. I leaned back in my chair, unimpressed. Let him try. But Graham wasn't finished. That's not all. There's been a breach in our financial systems. That got my attention. I straightened up. A breach? Graham nodded. An unknown hacker accessed our accounts late last night. They tried to plant falsified data, make it look like your company was involved in financial fraud. I felt my jaw tighten. Caldwell was desperate, and desperate men were dangerous. The phone on my desk buzzed, a message from Celeste. Dad, something's off. I noticed weird activity on your accounts. I think someone is trying to frame you. A chill ran down my spine. This isn't just a fight anymore, Dad. He's trying to destroy us. She was right, and I wasn't going to let him win. The media was already circling like vultures. Headlines appeared across news outlets, questioning the integrity of my firm. Financial irregularities found in Carter Enterprises. Architectural titan Adrian Carter under investigation. Is this the fall of a business empire? It was all lies, fabricated evidence. Caldwell's way of fighting dirty. Clients started calling, some worried, some angry. I spent the morning in back-to-back damage control meetings. Graham, ever the realist, sat across from me, arms crossed. "They're not just coming after your business," he said. "They're coming after your reputation." I ran a hand down my face, forcing myself to stay calm. Then we hit back harder. While I was fighting in the public eye, Marissa was fighting a different kind of battle. Her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Anonymous messages, some threatening, some cryptic. You should have chosen wisely. People who betray Caldwell don't last long. Watch your back. Her stomach twisted in knots. Caldwell suspected her. She tried calling Dominic. No answer. She went to his apartment. The concierge told her he had left town. Panic rose like bile in her throat. She was running out of options. She had made a fatal mistake. She picked the wrong side. And now she was paying the price. I wasn't done yet. If Caldwell wanted to drag me through the mud, I was ready to burn his entire empire to the ground. Graham and I worked late into the night, feeding the media everything we had on Caldwell's illegal dealings. Caldwell Industries under investigation for fraud. Leaked documents reveal corrupt business practices. Major investors pulling out from Caldwell's firm. The tide was turning. One by one, his allies were abandoning him. And then, we found our hacker. A cybersecurity expert I hired traced the breach's origin. Someone close to Caldwell, a former associate who had just been fired. I smiled. Caldwell was about to feel real betrayal. By midnight, I was finally starting to feel like I had the upper hand. Then I got the message. "You're playing with fire, Carter. Watch your back." I frowned, staring at the words on my screen. A second later, the security alarm in my house blared. My blood ran cold. And then, a scream. Celeste. I was out of my chair before I could think, sprinting down the hallway, my heart pounding. I reached her door, throwing it open, and what I saw made my breath catch in my throat. I burst into Celeste's room, my heart hammering against my ribs. She stood near the window, her small frame trembling, her hands clenched into fists. The curtains fluttered violently in the cold night air. The window was open. Someone had been here. "Dad!" Celeste's voice was barely above a whisper. There was someone outside. I moved fast, pulling her into my arms, scanning the room for any sign of danger. My instincts were screaming, every muscle in my body tensed for a fight. The security alarm continued blaring through the house. I grabbed my phone and pulled up the security camera feed. The red warning icons flashed. A perimeter breach in the backyard. I clenched my jaw. Not in my house. Gun in hand, I moved through the house with calculated precision, checking every corner, every shadow. The front door was still locked, no signs of forced entry. But the back. Through the kitchen window, I caught movement. A dark figure near the fence. "Stop!" I barked, throwing open the door. The figure hesitated for half a second before disappearing into the darkness. I fired a warning shot into the ground. The loud crack split through the night, but they were already gone. I didn't chase them, not yet. I needed to make sure Celeste was safe first. I returned to her room, finding her curled up on the edge of her bed, hugging her knees. She looked up at me with wide, frightened eyes. Was it him? Caldwell. I didn't answer right away. I didn't want to lie to her. Instead, I noticed something on her desk, a small folded piece of paper. I picked it up slowly, my gut already twisting before I even opened it. "Your daughter is a pretty girl. It would be a shame if something happened to her." The air in the room turned suffocatingly thick. A cold fury ignited in my chest, slow and simmering, burning through every rational thought. This wasn't about business anymore. This was personal. Graham answered on the first ring. "They crossed the line," I said, my voice dangerously even. "We need to hit back, and we need to do it now." I didn't wait for him to respond. I rattled off orders. "Get me the best security firm. I want this house locked down like a damn fortress. Full surveillance, armed guards. No one comes near Celeste without my approval." I glanced at my daughter, her shoulders curled inward, trying to make herself small. I wouldn't let her feel unsafe in her own home. "No one is laying a hand on my daughter," I swore. "Not now, not ever." The next morning, my phone rang. I already knew who it was before I even looked. Caldwell. I answered, but didn't speak first. He let out a soft chuckle, smug, amused. "I told you not to mess with me, Carter," he said smoothly. "Now, you'll learn the cost." I exhaled slowly through my nose. my grip tightening around the phone. "No," I said, my voice like steel. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." I hung up, my fists clenched at my sides. Caldwell had just declared war. Now, I was going to end it. By sunrise, I was already at my desk, sleeves rolled up, a fresh cup of coffee untouched beside me. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford. Not when Caldwell had just made the biggest mistake of his life. Graham sat across from me, flipping through a thick stack of documents. "Everything's in place," he said. I nodded. We had been preparing for this moment. The final strike. "Run me through it," I said. Graham smirked, knowing exactly how this was going to end. "First," he began, "we've sent anonymous leaks to the media. Offshore accounts, shell corporations, tax evasion. The journalists are eating it up." "Good," I muttered. "Second, the feds are getting involved. We handed them everything on a silver platter, enough to trigger immediate investigations." I leaned back in my chair. "And his investors?" Graham's grin widened. Already panicking, the stock took a nosedive the moment the news broke. I exhaled slowly, satisfaction settling in. By the time Caldwell realizes what's happening, it'll be too late. Caldwell's morning started with his phone ringing off the hook. By the time he checked his email, his stomach had dropped. Every major news outlet was running with the same story. Lawrence Caldwell, under federal investigation for financial crimes. Stock in Caldwell Enterprises plummets amid scandal. Authorities seize assets linked to illegal offshore accounts. His heart pounded as he slammed his phone onto his desk. "Carter," he growled. An emergency board meeting was called. Caldwell sat at the head of the table, his face a mask of cold fury. His executives were pale, shifting nervously in their seats. "What the hell is going on?" one of them demanded. Another threw down a printed article. "They have proof, Lawrence. We're finished if we don't act now." Caldwell clenched his fists. "This isn't over," he spat. But deep down, he knew he was losing control. Marissa saw the writing on the wall. She had tied herself to a sinking ship. She rushed to the bank, hands trembling as she entered her account details. Balance, $0.00. Her breath hitched. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." Her mind raced. Caldwell had used her. And now, Adrian was finishing the job. She packed a bag, throwing in whatever cash she had left. If she didn't get out now, she never would. Back at my office, Graham handed me a folder. "It's done," he said. "Caldwell's finished." I opened it, scanning the final pieces of our takedown. The SEC had just announced a full-scale investigation into Caldwell's businesses. Multiple executives were already under scrutiny. Arrest warrants were being issued. I watched the news, taking a slow, deep breath. This is what happens when you threaten my daughter. The FBI stormed into Caldwell's office later that afternoon. The cameras were already waiting outside. Reporters shouted questions. Then, Caldwell emerged, in handcuffs. His face was twisted in fury as he was shoved into the back of a police vehicle. But before he disappeared, he turned toward the cameras. "This isn't over, Carter," he snarled. At home, I turned off the TV. I exhaled, my shoulders relaxing for the first time in weeks. "Yes, it is," I muttered. I thought that was the end. I thought the war was over. But then, my phone rang. The moment I answered, I knew. Something was wrong. I leaned back in my chair, watching the news as Caldwell was hauled away in handcuffs. The satisfaction of seeing him fall was undeniable. It was over. At least, I thought it was. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. I hesitated for half a second before answering. A distorted voice greeted me. Caldwell was just the beginning. A cold shiver ran down my spine. "You think this is over? It's not." I gripped the phone tightly. "Who the hell is this?" The caller chuckled darkly. Then the line went dead. The moment the call ended, I was already dialing Graham. "We have a problem," I told him. I explained the call, every word, every pause, every shift in tone. "Caldwell's people?" he asked. "Maybe. But this didn't feel like Caldwell," I admitted. I had spent weeks tearing that man apart. I knew his patterns, his weaknesses. This voice. This wasn't him. Graham didn't hesitate. "I'll get our cybersecurity team on it." Within minutes, we were tracing the call. But whoever had contacted me knew how to cover their tracks. The signal bounced between multiple locations, rerouted through encrypted servers. Whoever they were, they didn't want to be found. Celeste walked into my office just as I ended the call with Graham. She frowned at my expression. "What's wrong?" "Nothing to worry about," I said automatically. She wasn't convinced. "Dad, I heard you on the phone." I sighed. There was no point in lying to her. "Someone called. They're trying to scare me." Celeste crossed her arms, her brow furrowed in thought. "Dad, what if this isn't over?" I met her gaze, forcing a reassuring smile. "I'll find out who's behind this," I promised. "And when I do, they'll regret ever picking up the phone." Marissa had thought she was safe. That was before her phone buzzed with a single chilling message. "You should have stayed loyal. Now, you're just another loose end." Her stomach dropped. She tried calling Caldwell's people, but they weren't answering. No money, no allies, no way out. She was trapped. She wasn't just running from Adrian anymore. Now, someone else was hunting her. That night, the security alarm at my house blared. I grabbed my gun before I even registered what was happening. The cameras showed movement outside. 2 figures, masks, weapons in hand. They were trying to breach the property. Before I could even step outside, my security team had already engaged them. Gunfire rang through the night. One intruder managed to escape. The other wasn't so lucky. We caught him. I stood over him as security restrained him, my mind cold and calculating. "Who sent you?" I asked. He stayed silent. I crouched down, my voice deadly calm. "Last chance." Still nothing. Then I searched his pockets. And that's when I found it. A single black card with one word printed in silver letters. Retribution. Graham and I sat in my study, staring at the card. "This isn't Caldwell," Graham muttered. I nodded. This is someone else." We had assumed Caldwell was the final enemy. But we had been wrong. Something bigger was coming. Something darker. "We thought we ended this," Graham said. I clenched my jaw. "No," I said. "This was just the beginning." The first true warning came the next morning, and this time, it wasn't just a message, it was a direct attack. I barely slept after the break-in. Every noise outside my window, every flicker of movement in the security cameras had my nerves on edge. I knew this wasn't over. Graham and my head of security sat across from me in the study, both wearing grim expressions. "Whoever's behind this isn't some random thug," I muttered. Graham nodded. "This was planned, coordinated." Celeste stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching us. "Are we in danger, Dad?" I met her eyes and forced a calm smile. "I won't let anything happen to you," I promised. But deep down, I wasn't sure if I was telling the truth. That afternoon, one of my security team members didn't report in. I found him slumped over in his car, unconscious. Pinned to his jacket was a single piece of paper. "Leave now, or we take her next." My blood turned ice cold. I didn't need to ask who her was. Celeste. I clenched my fists so tightly my knuckles went white. This wasn't just intimidation anymore. This was war. That night, the second attack came. It wasn't a break-in this time. It was worse. Celeste was on her way home from school. Her driver called me, his voice laced with panic. "We're being followed!" I was already moving before he even finished the sentence. 2 black SUVs tailed them, speeding up, trying to force them off the road. I jumped into my car, gripping the wheels so tight my hands ached. "Hold on," I told the driver. "I'm coming." By the time I reached them, one of the SUVs had swerved dangerously close, trying to ram them. I cut into the chase, blocking their path. The SUVs veered off, disappearing into the night. I jumped out, yanking the car door open. Celeste was shaking, gripping the seatbelt like it was the only thing keeping her together. I pulled her into my arms. "It's okay," I whispered. "I've got you." But I wasn't sure if that was true anymore. Marissa had no idea what was happening. She was too busy trying to escape. She bought a bus ticket, planning to disappear for good. But she wasn't alone. As she stepped onto the bus, a man in a dark suit blocked her path. "Going somewhere, Mrs. Carter?" She froze. She knew. She was trapped. I sat in my office, staring at the note that had been pinned to my security guard. I had spent weeks defending, reacting. That ended tonight. I dialed Graham. "Find out who's behind this," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "I don't care what it takes. No more waiting. No more playing defense. They came after my daughter," I said. "Now, I'm coming for them." The first real lead came within hours, and it pointed to someone I never expected. The moment Graham handed me the file, I knew we were about to cross a line. Vincent Lorne. The name meant nothing to most people, but to me, it confirmed what I already suspected. Caldwell's empire may have crumbled, but his reach wasn't gone. Someone was keeping his network alive. I tightened my jaw, flipping through surveillance photos of the man who had been in the SUV that tried to run Celeste off the road. He was a former enforcer for Caldwell. Ruthless, efficient, loyal, to a paycheck, not a cause. Caldwell was in prison, but his ghost was still haunting me. Graham's phone rang. He listened for a moment, his expression darkening before he looked at me. "Adrian, you're not going to believe this." I already knew what was coming. "Someone you know is working against you." I exhaled sharply. "Who?" The name dropped like a hammer. Dominic Graves. A slow, simmering rage burned in my chest. The same man who stole my wife. The same man who thought he could take my daughter's future. The same man who had disappeared when everything fell apart. I should have buried him when I had the chance. My private investigator wasted no time. Dominic had been keeping a low profile, but his name still held weight in the right circles. He wasn't just surviving. He was rebuilding. Piece by piece, he was stitching Caldwell's old network back together. And now, he was coming for me. I stared at the photos on my desk, my hands curling into fists. This wasn't just business. This was personal. Marissa had no idea how deep she'd fallen. Trapped in a dimly lit warehouse, she sat across from one of Dominic's men. "You wanted power, Marissa," the man sneered. "You should have chosen better alliances." She swallowed hard. She knew she was expendable. "I can help you take Carter down," she whispered. Silence stretched between them before the man smirked. "Now you're finally saying something useful." Celeste watched me from the doorway as I made my final calls. "Are we going to be okay, Dad?" I turned to face her, my voice steady. "We're going to end this." Dominic thought I had moved on, but he was about to learn. Adrian Carter never left a battle unfinished. The first move in the final war came at sunrise, and it was Adrian who struck first. The first strike came at dawn. By the time Dominic Graves opened his eyes, the damage had already begun. Reports flooded in, IRS audits, FBI investigations, financial holds on his properties, bank accounts frozen, investments flagged, calls from lawyers demanding explanations. Dominic sat up, gripping his phone. His voice was sharp. "Who the hell is behind this?" His assistant stammered. "It's Carter, sir. Adrian Carter." Dominic's grip tightened around his phone. Adrian was making his move, and Dominic had never felt more powerless. Marissa watched from the sidelines as Dominic unraveled. She had seen men panic before, but this was different. This was desperation. Dominic was losing, and he knew it. Marissa knew she had one shot to save herself. She picked up her phone and called the last person she ever thought she'd reach out to. "Adrian." "I have information on Dominic," she whispered. "Let me go, and I'll give it to you." A long silence stretched before Adrian finally spoke. "I don't trust you, Marissa." A pause. "But I trust that you'll do anything to save yourself." Dominic wasn't done fighting. He was reckless now, lashing out, hiring men to intimidate Adrian. But Adrian had been expecting it. When Dominic's goons got too close, they were immediately neutralized. Adrian watched from his office as security footage showed Dominic's men getting dragged away in cuffs. And then, the inevitable, Dominic himself called. Adrian answered, voice calm. "You took my wife, you tried to steal my life, and then you came after my daughter. You destroyed Caldwell, that should have been enough," Dominic snapped. Adrian smirked coldly. "You thought I would just let you walk away?" The final blow came when the FBI received everything Adrian had compiled. Dominic's empire collapsed overnight. He tried to escape the country, but before he could board his private jet, federal agents intercepted him. Cameras flashed, reporters swarmed, and as Dominic was forced into a squad car, he glanced up at the airport TV screen. There, on the news, was Adrian Carter, calm, composed, victorious. I watched the footage from my office, sipping whiskey as Graham sat across from me. "It's over," he said. "How do you feel?" I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly, like I just cleaned up the trash. Adrian had won, but he also knew that peace never lasted long. Just as Adrian was ready to move on, an unexpected visitor arrived at his doorstep, one that would change everything. I finally allowed myself to exhale. Dominic was locked away. Caldwell's empire was nothing but ashes. Marissa had vanished, too broken and desperate to be a threat anymore. Most importantly, Celeste was safe. For the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. Graham poured himself a drink, settling into the chair across from me. "You know, Adrian, maybe it's time to actually enjoy your life again," he said. I nodded, but deep down, I knew better. Men like me, our battles never truly ended. That evening, my phone buzzed. "Sir," one of my security guards said, "there's someone here asking to see you. Says it's urgent." I frowned. "Who?" "She says her name is Evelyn Monroe, and she claims to have information about Marissa." The name meant nothing to me, but the way the guard hesitated before speaking told me everything I needed to know. I checked the security feed. A well-dressed woman in her mid-40s stood at the front gate. She looked composed, too composed. My instincts sharpened. "Let her in," I said. Evelyn Monroe sat across from me in my study, a folder resting on the desk between us. She was poised, her expression unreadable. "You need to see this," she said. I flipped open the folder, my grip tightened around the pages. Inside were financial records, offshore accounts, money transfers, and at the center of it all, Marissa. This wasn't just about her stealing from Celeste's trust fund. She had been involved in something much bigger, something far worse. A particular document caught my eye, a signed agreement between Marissa and someone I never expected. I clenched my jaw. "What is this?" Evelyn leaned forward, her voice calm but firm. "It means your ex-wife wasn't just after your money, Adrian. She was part of something much bigger." I stared at the pages, my pulse steady, my mind racing. The money had been funneled through shell corporations, companies with ties to people I recognized, people I had fought against before, people who had real power. Caldwell and Dominic were nothing compared to this. Evelyn studied me carefully. "Caldwell and Graves were small players," she said. "The real enemy is still out there." I exhaled slowly, setting the folder down. Then I met her gaze, cold and unyielding. "Then it looks like I still have work to do." Adrian thought he had won, but now he realized the war had only just begun. By the next morning, Adrian had already begun preparing, because if Evelyn Monroe was right, he was about to face the most dangerous battle of his life. I barely slept that night. The documents Evelyn Monroe had given me lay scattered across my desk, illuminated by the dim glow of my desk lamp. I had read them once, twice, a third time, just to make sure I wasn't imagining things. Marissa had always been selfish, greedy, but this was something else entirely. She hadn't just stolen from Celeste's trust fund. She had been moving money, large sums, through hidden offshore accounts. And every time I followed the paper trail, one name kept appearing: Marcus Varela. "Who the hell is Marcus Varela?" I muttered under my breath. I had spent months thinking I was fighting Dominic, Caldwell, even Marissa, but they were just distractions, pawns in a game far bigger than I had imagined. And now, I was staring at the real enemy. By morning, I had made a decision. I needed answers. Evelyn agreed to meet in a private location, one of my safe houses, a quiet townhouse on the outskirts of the city. She was already there when I arrived, waiting with another file in her hands. "Tell me what you know," I said, taking a seat across from her. She slid the folder toward me. I opened it. And what I saw made my blood run cold. Marcus Varela wasn't just a businessman. He was a ghost, operating in the shadows, corporate fraud, political corruption, ties to organized crime. And Marissa? She had been working with him. Not for herself, but as part of something much bigger. "She was a pawn," I murmured, flipping through the documents. Evelyn nodded. "And now that Caldwell and Dominic are gone, Varela knows you're getting too close to the truth." I clenched my jaw. "And why are you telling me this?" Evelyn's gaze was unreadable. Then, finally, she spoke. "Because Varela took something from me, too." I studied her carefully. "So, this is about revenge." She didn't deny it. "You want justice. I want revenge. We might be after the same thing, Adrian." I leaned back, thinking. I still didn't trust her, but I didn't have the luxury of walking away. Not when Celeste's safety was on the line. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. I answered. A calm, deep voice spoke on the other end. "I hear you've been looking into things that don't concern you, Mr. Carter." I sat up straighter, grip tightening around my phone. "And who the hell are you?" A soft chuckle. "Someone who doesn't like loose ends. Walk away while you still can." Click. The line went dead. I set my phone down slowly, my mind racing. Graham walked into the room a moment later, his expression tense. "Something wrong?" I exhaled. "Varela knows." Graham studied me for a long moment. "Are we backing off?" I thought of Celeste, of the men who had tried to run her car off the road, of the intruder who had left that note in her room. Then I looked back at Graham, my decision already made. "No," I said. "I've taken down worse than him. It's time Marcus Varela learned who I am." Varela thought he could scare Adrian Carter away, but he just made the worst mistake of his life. The first step in taking down Marcus Varela was finding his weakness, and Adrian already knew exactly where to start. I stood in my office, staring down at the city below, my mind razor sharp. Marcus Varela thought a phone call would scare me. He was wrong. I had faced threats before, men who thought power made them untouchable. But the truth was, everyone had a weakness, and I was going to find his. Graham spread a set of files across the conference table. Evelyn sat opposite me, flipping through intelligence reports. "Varela isn't like Caldwell or Dominic," Graham said. "We can't just leak a few documents and watch him crumble. He's too connected, too careful." "Then we go deeper," I said. "We find the cracks in his foundation." Evelyn tapped a folder with her index finger. "He does have one weakness." I looked up. His younger brother, Lucas Varela. Unlike Marcus, Lucas had a clean record, on paper at least. He ran a hedge fund, kept out of his brother's criminal activities, and stayed under the radar. But Evelyn's research told a different story. "Marcus protects him," she explained. "It's the only time he's ever shown an ounce of loyalty." I exhaled. "Then that's our way in." Graham smirked. "Everyone has a pressure point. We just found his..." Tracking Lucas was easy. He wasn't hiding. We sent a simple message. No threats, no aggression, just the truth. "Your brother is about to fall. Choose your side now." Lucas hesitated. I could see it in his eyes when we met him in a private restaurant. "You don't know what you're doing," he muttered, gripping his whiskey glass. "Marcus isn't Caldwell. He won't just roll over and disappear." Evelyn leaned in. "You already know how this ends, Lucas. The only question is, do you want to go down with him?" He didn't answer, but I saw the flicker of doubt. We had planted the seed. That night, Marcus struck first. The explosion rocked the lower level of my office building, shattering windows, sending fire and smoke billowing into the parking garage. No casualties, just a message. I arrived within minutes, my security team already securing the perimeter. Graham stormed toward me, his expression livid. "He's done playing games, Adrian," he said. "This just got personal." I adjusted my cuffs, stepping through the debris. He just made his last mistake. Lucas called me the next morning. He sounded shaken. He hesitated, then let out a long breath. "I want out. I can't do this anymore." I didn't respond, letting him talk. "He's not invincible," he admitted. "You can take him down." I clenched my jaw. "We will." Lucas handed over the financial records, the final piece of the puzzle. Marcus Varela had spent years believing he was untouchable. He was about to learn just how wrong he was. The moment Lucas handed me the final records, I knew it was over. Marcus Varela had spent years weaving a web of corruption, believing he was untouchable, but even the most powerful men bled when cut deep enough. And I was about to make sure he never recovered. Graham leaned over the table, his expression sharp with focus. "The federal task force is in position. The moment he makes a move, we'll have him." Evelyn sat across from me, calm but unreadable. "Are you ready for this?" I glanced at the stack of evidence, then at the message already typed into my phone. "Yeah," I said, pressing send. "Your brother sold you out." "It's over, Varela." The read receipt appeared instantly. A moment later, my phone rang. Marcus's voice came through, eerily calm. "You really think this ends with me in handcuffs?" "It ends with you having nothing," I replied. "No money, no power, no escape." A dark chuckle. "We'll see about that." He hung up. I exhaled. Move on him, now. Marcus's plan was simple. run. With his empire crumbling, he had one last play, his offshore accounts. But I had already moved first. The moment he tried to transfer funds, every one of his accounts was frozen, trapped. His only option was to flee the country. Graham's sources tracked him to a private airstrip outside the city. I watched the live satellite feed as Marcus arrived, walking toward a waiting jet, his pace quick, frantic. Then the helicopters appeared. The task force descended. Armed officers surrounded the airstrip. Marcus turned to run. But there was nowhere left to go. The cuffs locked around Marcus's wrists as he glared at me from the tarmac. "You don't understand what you've done," he hissed. I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only he could hear. "I understand perfectly," I said. "You threatened my family. Now, you pay the price." The agents pulled him away. And just like that, Marcus Varela was finished. Evelyn stood beside me as we watched him disappear into the armored vehicle. "You did what no one else could," she murmured. I nodded, but the weight of everything pressed down on me. Was it over? Or had I simply shifted the balance of power? Hours later, I walked through my front door. Celeste ran into my arms, burying her face in my chest. "Is it really over, Dad?" I kissed the top of her head. "Yeah, sweetheart," I said. "It's over. For now." Weeks passed, the world moved on, and for the first time in years, I was no longer looking over my shoulder. Marcus Varela was behind bars. His empire was dismantled. The threats that had loomed over my life, over Celeste's life, were gone. For now. Graham sat across from me in my office, sipping his coffee. "So, what now?" he asked. "You've won. Enjoy it." I exhaled, leaning back in my chair. Winning. That was a strange word. The kind of word that should bring relief, but instead, it felt hollow. "You know peace doesn't last," I said. Graham smirked. "No, but that doesn't mean you can't take a damn break." I looked at the framed photo on my desk, Celeste, grinning at me from our trip to the lake last summer. Maybe Graham was right. Maybe, for once, I could breathe. Marissa was in custody, awaiting trial. The prosecution had enough evidence to ensure she'd serve time. I was asked if I wanted to see her. I thought about it, for a long time. Then I said no. She had made her choices, and I had made mine. She was no longer my burden to carry. Evelyn Monroe disappeared just as suddenly as she had arrived. No calls, no messages, no trace. I wasn't surprised. People like her didn't linger. They came when they were needed, and then they vanished into the shadows. I had a feeling I'd never see her again. And yet, something told me I hadn't heard the last of her. I took Celeste on a trip, just the two of us. No security teams, no threats, no enemies waiting in the dark, just us. We sat at an outdoor cafe, the evening breeze carrying the scent of fresh bread and roasted coffee. Celeste took a sip of her milkshake, her blue eyes studying me. "Are you happy, Dad?" she asked. I thought about everything I had lost, everything I had fought for, everything I still had. I reached across the table, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Yeah, sweetheart," I said, smiling. "I think I finally am." That night, I tucked her into bed, kissed her forehead, turned off the light. And just as I was about to leave the room, my phone buzzed. A message. No name, no number, just 7 words. "Power never dies, Carter. It only moves." I stared at the screen. Then I smirked, deleting the message. "Let them come," I muttered. "I'm ready." Because Adrian Carter was never just a survivor. He was a warrior. End of book. Life doesn't hand out victories. You fight for them. Through betrayal, through loss, through every scar life carves into you. What defines you isn't the pain, but how you rise from it. I fought for my daughter. I fought for justice. And in the end, I found something more. Strength, resilience, and the power to move forward. Because power doesn't come from control. It comes from knowing who you are and never letting the world take that from you. If my story resonates with you, if you believe in standing your ground and protecting what truly matters, then stick around. Subscribe. Because the fight for what's right never ends.